Welcome to Eldercare Illuminated, Torchlight's caregiving podcast. Eldercare Illuminated addresses the ins and outs and ups and downs of caring for your loved ones. Join us for interesting conversations with eldercare specialists, geriatric care managers, attorneys, and ordinary people with extraordinary caregiving experiences.
Welcome to today's episode of Eldercare Illuminated, brought to you by Torchlight. Today our host is attorney Carolyn Romano, VP of Product here at Torchlight. She'll be speaking to elder law attorney Harry Margolis. Eldercare Illuminated is a production of Torchlight, which supports working caregivers and their families. If you're not a Torchlight user, as offered in your employer's benefit plan, but you would like access to Torchlight, ask your employer to call us. Contact information is on our website, torchlight.care.
I'm speaking today with attorney Harry Margolis of Margolis Bloom, a law firm here in Massachusetts that is nationally recognized for its elder law, estate, and special needs planning work. Harry, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Carolyn. Glad to be here.
Well, we're certainly excited to have this opportunity to speak with you today. I thought we would start by asking you to just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to focus on these areas of the law.
So I've been doing this for over 30 years now, and I got into it. I was working at a larger law firm in Boston back when I got out of law school, and they were staffing a position at Greater Boston Elderly Legal Services. And every 6 months, they'd send a lawyer over to work there for a period of time and really do mostly landlord-tenant law. But I became aware of what was in a brand new field of elder law, which really at that time combined estate planning for private clients with public benefits law that legal services attorneys were doing. And so the first pioneers in elder law were all legal services attorneys who realized that the knowledge they had of Medicaid and other public benefits programs was really vital to middle-class people who are facing really high costs paying for long-term care, mostly for nursing home care. So I became aware of what was then a brand new field, and I guess being somewhat entrepreneurial, I ultimately never went back to the big law firm and went out and hung up a shingle to do elder law. And I've been doing that along with estate planning and special needs planning ever since.
That's terrific. You know, I think a lot of times people are not entirely aware of what elder law practice even consists of. So can we dig into that a little bit?
Definitely. It's really somewhat of a mishmash, which is why people probably, one of the reasons people don't know what it is. So its base is traditional estate planning, wills, trusts, powers of attorney, healthcare proxies. But as one of my colleagues recently described it, it's really helping people plan for unexpected events and getting through those unexpected events. And those events often have to do with cognitive decline or physical disability. And all of us, as we get older, have a chance that these things are going to happen to us, but we really don't know whether we're going to have a short-term disability or a long-term one. And for most of us, if we have insurance and some savings, a short-term disability is not going to be much of a problem, but a long-term one really could be. So we help people both prepare in terms of doing planning, and then when a crisis hits, we work with them and their families to get them through the crisis, often simply explaining how various public benefits programs work, how a family member can get control of assets, and helping them through that process.
So who is actually walking into your office for this sort of support and assistance?
So if it's doing advanced planning, it's generally the seniors, and seniors is really, I guess, in the eye of the beholder. So it could be anyone from their 60s to their 80s, even though people in their 80s may be parents of people in their 60s. And if it's a crisis, it's often the spouse of the person needing care or their children, so their adult children.
Sure. And what are you finding? Is it more folks come to see you when they're in some sort of crisis? What would you say the breakdown is?
It's probably about 50-50. Earlier in our practice, it was more crisis planning. But as I guess we've been around and we're better known, we have a lot more people coming in for general estate planning. And of course, we also do probate and guardianship and, as I mentioned, special needs planning.
And what do you think? I was doing some research for the conversation with you today, and there are some pretty stunning statistics about the number of folks who have not done any estate planning. And one statistic was that 60% of adults don't have even a simple will. And that folks who are, much older, there's still plenty, 40% from age 53 to 71 don't have a will. So to what do you attribute that?
Well, I'd say that those statistics probably understate the problem, because a lot of those people who have documents may have either incomplete documents or out-of-date documents. So I would say that most people don't have an up-to-date estate plan, or the vast majority don't. And I attribute it mostly to a few things, but a big part of it is the lack of urgency. I mean, hopefully we're not going to die or get sick anytime soon, and we usually have a lot on our plate to deal with day to day, and so we put this off. And of course, no one really wants to be contemplating their death or disability, so that's another reason people put this off. And I think finally, people usually don't want to go see lawyers, even though we're very nice and friendly. We don't necessarily have that reputation, and we can be expensive. So I think those are all reasons that deter people from doing the planning they really need to do.
Yeah, it's funny. I've spent some time contemplating mortality now and again, and there really is that notion. Of course, we know nobody gets out alive, but then there's, I forget that quote, but it's something about, I know everybody dies, but I always thought an exception would be made in my case. So many of us, we kind of get it on an intellectual level, but I don't know that we fully embody the fact that, yes, at one point it will be us 6 feet under, or however we prepare to go, be turned into a tree or something.
I think that's true. And if we're healthy, we don't expect to have a disability either anytime soon. So this doesn't have urgency. And the reality is, in most cases, for people who certainly are under 60, and that it isn't urgent. But bad things happen, unfortunately, and it doesn't take that much to do at least the basic planning. But when people really need to plan is probably when they get into their 60s, and it's often a good time to plan because they may be contemplating retirement or hopefully retiring, and they may be moving or not moving at that point. But it's a good time to take stock and answer a lot of questions about retirement and about estate planning.
Definitely. I remember with my own parents, my father's passed away, my mom is still living. Prior to his passing, they did finally, after my mom had to repeatedly pester him to sit down and tell her, well, what are all the accounts? Where is everything? Because it was, more of a traditional marriage. And, they had sat together and they came up with that document he was a former police officer, and I think they titled it, When I Go Off to That Great Station House in the Sky. And so fortunately they could bring some humor to it, but it was not without, a few tears shed that day, even though, he wasn't really going anywhere at that moment. So it brings up a lot for people to contemplate these end of life.
Yeah, I'm glad your parents did that, because it's very important, especially where one spouse is taking care of all the finances, that the other spouse or the children know where things are, where accounts are, and these days how to log on to digital accounts to get access and pay bills and do whatever is necessary to run the household.
Exactly. The social media accounts. How do we get it in there?
Right.
It's funny now. My mom is always quizzing us. I have 3 sisters, and all right. So where did I put the estate plan, and where is this? And do you remember how to do that? And what's the code for this? So she's really trying to make sure we're well prepared.
Good for her.
All right. So then let's do a little bit of a deeper dive. I know that Medicare and Medicaid is a part of the work that you do. So can you explain the difference between the two? People are often confused. And then also the relationship between the two, because they're definitely connected for some folks.
Yeah. So it is very complicated, and just using almost the same name for the two adds to the confusion. So Medicare is the health insurance you get after you turn 65, assuming you paid into the Social Security system, which most people have. And it's a good program. It has its gaps, unfortunately. So most people also buy a Medigap policy to cover those gaps. And now they also have to buy a Part D policy to cover medications. But it's a federal program, and it's virtually universal. But it's built on an acute care model. So it pays for your doctor's visits, your hospital visits, and it pays for some post-hospital care under certain circumstances. So if you have to go from a hospitalization, say you broke your hip and then you're being sent to a skilled nursing facility for rehab for a few weeks, that will be covered by Medicare. But it does not pay for chronic care. So if you can't get around and you need help at home, if you need to move to assisted living or a nursing home, Medicare doesn't pay for that. And that's often a confusion because people expect that they have Medicare, they paid into it for decades and decades, and so it should cover whatever they need. Medicaid is, at root, really a welfare program. So it's health insurance for people who qualify as poor, but because there's nothing else out there, it's also become the long-term care insurance of the middle class. And the rules on what it means to be poor and to qualify are very complex. And they get even more complex when there's a married couple because they don't want the one spouse to qualify and the other spouse to still have tons of money. So there are limits on both spouses in that case. But Medicaid does pay for nursing home care if you qualify. Increasingly, it pays for some assisted living and some home care, though that's more complicated and different from state to state. So we get quite involved in our practice on Medicaid because we're helping explain what it covers and what it doesn't, how people can qualify or not qualify, and what steps they can take to qualify. And there are a number of planning tools that people can use either in advance so that if they ever need care, they can qualify for benefits, or once they need care, or especially once a spouse needs care, to protect the other spouse so that they're not financially destitute paying for the nursing home spouse's care.
Right. And so what does it sometimes look like for you in a situation with a client when there's been some kind of crisis that's happened and there's really been no planning that's done?
So if there's a husband and wife, that's usually not a too big a problem, because if say the husband's in the nursing home and the wife is at home, we can usually protect the bulk of the assets for the wife who's at home, or the spouse, whether it's husband or wife. And in different states they use different tools to do this, but the spouse who's at home is limited to about $125,000 in what they call countable assets, and that's basically everything that you have in the bank or in an IRA or in a 401k plan or in an investment. And they can also keep their home. So there are ways to pay off debts to protect assets. So for instance, if you have a mortgage, you can pay off the mortgage and there's no problem with that. And you can also buy what's called an immediate annuity for the spouse who's at home. And that's a way to protect assets for her or for him. So there's often planning techniques, but they all depend on the client's situation at that time, their financial situation, their health, and where they live and what they may or may want for their future.
So it is kind of reassuring that even though a family might be in a crisis situation, there still are some good planning tools available to them. However, it's always better for folks to kind of plan ahead.
Yeah, I always say
thing.
It's never too early and it's never too late to do planning. So
right.
It's better to plan ahead, but if you haven't, there's usually still steps you can take.
And what are some of the things that folks need to be aware of when they are trying to plan ahead? I know sort of the age at which that happens, kind of the 5-year look back penalties. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be sort of super detailed, right, but just the general sense of what folks,
right. So the main
complications.
Right. So the main thing people need to do is have a power of attorney and a healthcare proxy in place so that someone else can act for them if they become incapacitated. Beyond that, I'm a big proponent of revocable trusts because they permit, they make it easier for people to step in, the co-trustees to step in, and they can also provide some protection from financial exploitation if there's a co-trustee who's helping manage assets. But beyond that, in terms of qualifying for Medicaid and protecting assets, the Congress, when they create the Medicaid program, they don't want people to give away their assets today and then tomorrow say, okay, well, now I'm impoverished, start paying for my care. So they've instituted what you alluded to, the 5-year rule, which basically says that if you give away assets and then apply for benefits within the next 5 years, you have to report those assets and report that transfer, and they're going to make you ineligible for benefits for a period of time based on your divesting yourself of assets. But if you make a transfer and you're able either to pay for your care or you don't need care for the subsequent 5 years, then they don't care. They only look back 5 years. So we often, doing advanced planning, talk to clients about this, and there's a lot of issues to balance. I mean, how they need to balance how much they want to protect assets, either for a spouse or for children, versus how much they want access to those assets for their own needs, whatever they may be. And there are often tax consequences to transferring assets that can be detrimental, and you know that the tax consequences are there, but you don't know whether you're ever going to need long-term care. So do you take the tax hit with the off chance that you may be saving money because you can qualify for Medicaid sooner? And that's a choice for each client to make. And some may decide, well, we'll transfer some money to our kids or into a trust because we want to make sure that's protected, but we're not going to transfer everything. Or in a lot of cases, they transfer the house, but keep their assets so that they can use their liquid assets for their living expenses and their care needs, but protect the non-liquid asset, which is the house.
Sure. And so what do you find that many people do have long-term care insurance that kind of helps out in the case of needing?
Yeah. So if you can afford it, that's the best thing to do, is to buy long-term care insurance, because then you don't have to worry about any of these Medicaid rules, or you can worry about them down the road if you are afraid that you may run out of long-term care insurance because your needs are so great. So that's the best solution. The only problem with long-term care insurance is it is expensive, and you have to make sure you can afford to pay for it for the long term, because you don't want to pay it for 15 years and then drop it, since that's just financing the insurance company. So that's the best route to go, is long-term care insurance.
So as I listen to all of these really wonderful explanations, actually, of very complicated information, it strikes me, how complicated this is. And even when, you and I were talking last week, as, many years as you've spent in this field, there are always things to learn, or regs that have changed and things like that. So I think about sort of the general family who, may be in some sort of crisis. They're really stressed out. They know they need to seek help. And, maybe they're, seniors who really don't understand, or that, they have cognitive issues and they've got their adult children with them showing up at your door, and they're trying to get an appointment after hours or on the weekend.
Well, it can be very confusing and overwhelming, especially if a parent needs care, because the family's often trying to grapple with providing them the best care possible and trying to figure out what that is. If, say a parent has a stroke or has a cognitive decline and is no longer safe at home, and perhaps something has happened that has meant that they're hospitalized, the family members are often dealing with trying to talk to the medical personnel. And if you've ever had to deal with somebody who's in a hospital, that's just talking to the doctors is difficult, because they're seeing a lot of patients and they're coming through, and they may or may not be coming through at the moment that you're there, or the times that you're there. So that can be difficult, just getting a straight story. And it can be hard for the people in the hospital to give you a straight story or prognosis because they don't know how your parent is going to do, whether they're going to get through this episode and be able to go home, or will need to have care at home, or can't go home and will have to go to assisted living, or may have to go to a skilled nursing facility for some period of time, but you don't know how long or whether it's permanent. So there's a lot of uncertainty, which makes it very hard to plan. A lot of this can be very time consuming, which can make it very overwhelming, especially if you're already pretty busy with your life in terms of work and family. So that makes it harder. And then there's uncertainty about finances and legal matters. So Medicare pays for some things, but not everything, as we discussed earlier. And often even that can get complicated, what Medicare will pay for and what it won't pay for. Then once Medicare ends, you're either on your own paying out of pocket, and it's often hard to know exactly how much you may have to pay out of pocket, or ultimately you qualify for Medicaid. And as we discussed, that can be very complicated. So one of the things we try to do or help clients with is at least answering some questions and helping them do a little triage, because often, because it's a changing picture, there are some things they can deal with immediately and some things they can put off and maybe need to put off to see what the ultimate care needs are of the parent. So a lot of what we do is just explain the so-called system to them, and then help walk through almost a decision tree. Here's what we can decide now, and here's some avenues we can move forward on, and here's what we should wait a week or two and we should talk again and then take the next step.
I'm sure that's incredibly helpful for folks who are already kind of stressed out and not necessarily thinking clearly or at the top of their game because they're in that fight or flight mode. So in your experience over the last few decades, have you noticed that there are some additional challenges for folks who are, they've been thrust into a crisis because, mom just fell and broke her hip, or dad managed to wander off, and then it's, the domino effect?
Well, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, it's often very overwhelming because people usually have pretty busy lives as it is, and you have all these now immediate needs of the parent. And also it seems often you have the immediate needs, especially if there's a hospitalization, of the medical profession, which, as we've all heard, wants to get mom out of the hospital as soon as possible. And they're often putting pressure on you to make a decision before you're ready. And then what does happen to work at that point? And what happens to your family? What happens to work? How are you going to get that done? And as we discussed, what we're often helping clients with is simply deciding, well, here are the 3 things you have to do now, and the other 10 things that you might have to do, you can worry about in a week or two. And we hope that helps our clients with calming down a bit and being able to focus and hopefully not spend quite as much time kind of running around in circles trying to find answers, and right. gives them more time to be able to figure out how to handle work and how to take care of their families at the same time they're also taking care of their parents. And also often this helps too with relationships between siblings, because siblings often are all trying to help and all trying to get information and hearing different half-truths from lots of different places. And if we can talk with all of them at the same time and answer their questions and narrow the uncertainties, that can save a lot of people a lot of time and perhaps help them divvy up the tasks among them so that it's not all on one person's shoulder.
That's a really great point, because I know so many people come out of the woodwork when a family's in crisis thinking they have the solution. You ought to do this, you ought to do that, but they maybe have a piece of information that's incomplete, as you were saying, or it's completely wrong. And it can be kind of paralyzing for a family when you're in that space of, you don't know what you don't know. You're not sure that you have sort of all the information you need to make a decision, or you've got the best information you're going to have, and you're going to make an imperfect decision, but at least you have your arms around most of the picture. So to have that guidance from, an attorney or to be able to trust the information you're getting, it's such a big piece of sort of calming your person down and really being on that path to making the right decisions for families.
Right. I think it helped reduce stress. And there's kind of the classic story for us on the East Coast that the brother from California flies in to be the shining knight and protect his mother, not knowing the entire situation or not knowing that his sisters back in Boston have been taking care of mom for years in some ways. So the sisters may say, well, now it's time for mom to move to assisted living. And she calls her son up and the son says, oh, that's not going to happen. You can still live at home. And we're going to make that happen with no real conception of what's going on at home and what may have been going on at home for years.
That's right. Yeah. So on the one hand, there are times where these situations bring family closer together. And then there are times where the family dynamics probably don't lend themselves to doing that so much.
Yeah. We've seen, I think, the whole range of families in our practice. And
I bet.
Yeah.
I bet. Probably within the same family, it can fluctuate as well.
That's true.
When I'm thinking about work situations again, and I'll have to consider how this gets woven in. But when my dad passed away, my grandfather pulled me aside and he said, Carolyn, you're really going to have to step up now and help your mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, okay, well, why is he singling me out for this? I mean, all of my sisters and I do help out considerably. But I said, well, why, Gramps, are you saying, I need to do that? And he's like, well, you're not married. All your sisters are married. They're raising their families. They don't have time to do all this. And I'm thinking, well, I'm the one who's working an incredibly stressful job and I live a few states away and I'm balancing everything, just, little old me. And, it was just interesting, to hear that perspective of sort of what sort of preconceived notions or biases that people have about how caregiving is supposed to unfold.
There are a lot of assumptions there.
Yeah.
I mean, I had this sense, and I don't want to cast any ethnic stereotypes or anything, but I suppose earlier in my practice, we had a lot of Irish clients from Boston, and it seemed that there was often a son or daughter who stayed at home and didn't get married and was as the primary caregiver to the parents.
Sure. But they weren't also necessarily out working, right? Or were they?
They probably weren't working.
Probably both.
They might have been working, and they may or may not have had that demanding a job, depending on the circumstances.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Well, the other thing that happens often is one child moves in with the parents. And that raises a whole lot of issues because that child may be doing the parents a real service or may need a place to live because they're having their own financial issues or both. And we've had situations where the child moves in and provides care and it's all working out for a while. But then the care needs expand and the child gets overwhelmed providing the care and ultimately feels that they should be compensated, which may be merited, but the other siblings may not agree, and then things sometimes happen under the table, and that can create troublesome family dynamics, even if in some ways deserve the compensation, or even if the parent had said, "Oh, well, you have such a great sacrifice. Let me pay you something." If it's not transparent, it's going to create a lot of suspicions. And it's better to have this all out in the open and everybody discussing it and coming to an agreement, or else it can really tear a family apart.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how in that sort of nuclear family unit, how much you sort of stay in your role within your family, and so it can make things even more difficult to navigate conflict and figure out those tough things about who feels entitled to what and who helped mom and dad more and all those things.
Right, exactly.
So it's really a lot to hold.
Yeah, definitely.
So Harry, how can people find out more about a lot of these complicated issues that we really just only touched on in our conversation today?
You're right. We can only scratch the surface on these issues, and planning people need to do depends on their unique situations. But there's a lot of information on two websites I founded. One is called ElderLawAnswers.com, and the other one is called specialneedsanswers.com. And we put on those sites as much consumer information as possible. We also answer questions from consumers, and we have about 650 law firms around the country who participate in one or both sites, and they're also listed on the site. So they have expertise on these issues and can represent individual clients or advise individual clients on what makes the most sense in their situation and in their states.
Wonderful. And once again, those websites are
ElderLawAnswers.com and SpecialNeedsAnswers.com.
Terrific. Well, Harry, thank you so much for your time today explaining all of this complicated information. Hopefully we can have you back again to talk with us some more.
That would be a pleasure. You had very good questions, Carolyn. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Take good care.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Eldercare Illuminated. If you want more information about today's topic and you have a Torchlight Elder account, log in and explore the growing number of e-guides and tools we offer. If you don't have access to Torchlight but you'd like to, ask your employer to call us. Our contact information is on our website, torchlight.care. You take care now, and we'll see you on the next episode of Eldercare Illuminated.
Thanks for listening to Eldercare Illuminated, a Torchlight caregiving podcast. Find other episodes of Eldercare Illuminated on iTunes, Spreaker, and Podcast Go. If you're interested in bringing Torchlight Elder or any of Torchlight's other caregiving products to your workplace, please contact info@torchlight.care. That's info@torchlight.care.